Welcome back to the final video on this series on forgiveness, and in particular, the power of self forgiveness. I'm going to start with reading a paragraph from my book, The Decree, Launched into the Limelight of God's Influence. And this comes from my chapter on forgiveness. You can get a signed copy of the decree at DeannaCurtis-Bowens.com. I will leave the link in the description. So I read. When we forgive, it enables God to move on our behalf. Forgiving allowed me to go to God in faith, knowing He truly had my best interests at hand. Forgiveness has nothing to do with the other person, but with everything concerning you. Over time, it has gotten easier for me to forgive quickly, and this is because I understand why it is crucial and the effects it could have on me personally, physically, and mentally, and also spiritually. So, as I promised, here's my story about self forgiveness. When I was 20 years old, after moving from Chicago to Austin, Texas, with my son, who was, Anthony was about 4 years old at the time. And I found myself pregnant again. And I was like freaking out. I called my mom, told my mom. And of all people, my mom advised me to have an abortion. And it really caught me by surprise, but then it didn't. You see, my mom had 5 children, five, and 4 daddies by the time she was 23. And I did not want to be like my mom. So I took her advice and terminated the pregnancy. But what I didn't count on or didn't have a clue of was the emotional trauma that would follow that act. And not only the emotional trauma, the act itself was very traumatic. And I go into more details about it in my book, The Decree. I'm not going to do that here. But I experienced bouts of depression after that. I would be at work. I worked second shift. Believe it or not, at the time I worked at the IRS. But I worked second shift. And I would be fine, just okay. And then all of a sudden, I would go into this deep depression. And it would be so bad sometimes I would have to go home early. And this, in and out of this depression, was really, really getting to me. And I was like that for about 6 months. And I was really trying to figure out, what do I need to, I felt like I needed to go home. I was ready to go home. That's how I was feeling. And I went to visit my family back in Chicago around Thanksgiving. But that wasn't it. It was a spiritual thing going on with me, but I didn't know. And it was in March the next year, that following year after Thanksgiving, I went to church. I visited a friend's church. And my going home was me rededicating my life to Christ, because when I moved to Texas, I was footloose and fancy free, doing everything obvious under the sun. But I rededicated my life to Christ. Started back going to church, started going to a local church. And I met my husband there. We got married and we moved to Virginia Beach. We started building our family. Our family started growing. And after my third son, I got pregnant again and had a miscarriage. I was 5 months pregnant when I miscarried. Whew. Man, that was hard. And I've grieved over that. And I grieved over that miscarriage. And during that time of grieving, I remembered the pregnancy I terminated. And all those feelings started coming up all back at the same time. The guilt, the shame of people knowing that I was pregnant again with a second child. But it was at that time when a still small voice inside says, forgive yourself. And I forgave myself. And it was a process. It wasn't instant. But I forgave myself for terminating the pregnancy, which I knew at the time was not right for me. So here I am today. You know, I had another son after that, and he's 29 years old. And God has been good to me. And he has blessed me. And you know, the most important part of that is I realized God had already forgiven me. It was just time for me to forgive myself so that I can free my soul from that guilt. You know, I talked about that guilt. Make that conscious decision to forgive. Forgiveness, as I have stated before, it's not okay in what other people did to you. It's not okay in what you did to yourself, the mistake you made. But it's a releasing, it's a washing, it's a spiritual thing, because forgiveness comes from God himself. Thank you for listening to my story in my series on forgiveness. Miss D is out. Be blessed by the best. Ciao.